Okay, we are live. Hi YouTube, welcome to today's Global X Ask Me Anything. I am Chen, Senior Analyst and Portfolio Manager here at Global X Canada. Today I'm proudly joined by Maxwell and Anthony from Blossom. Thank you both for joining us today, gentlemen. I will first hand it over to Max and Anthony to introduce themselves.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, great to see you guys, and thanks for having us in the studio. My name's Max. I'm the CEO of Blossom. For those who don't know Blossom, we're a social network for retail investors, and what makes us really unique is users actually link their brokerages to the app. So all of the discussions on the app are backed up by what people are actually holding and actually investing in, which on the topic of space will be really interesting because we can see what real Canadian investors are actually buying and doing with their cold hard cash. So Anthony, I'll turn it to you.
My name is Anthony. I'm an aerospace technician and engineering student, and this summer I am a data analyst intern at Blossom. I've been sharing my thoughts on space stocks for nearly 3 years now on Blossom, so it's interesting to see strong discussions on this topic on Blossom, and users often call me the Rocket Man.
Yeah. You were on it way before it was cool.
Thanks again for coming here today, guys. To talk about a very interesting topic today, SpaceX and the space technology stocks and the industry now that's evolving after the SpaceX IPO. Now, and also I just want to thank everyone for posting their questions on Reddit and joining us here on YouTube. And a friendly reminder that nothing on this AMA is a financial advice. Now, before we start, I just want to share something that I find interesting. So I posted a poll on LinkedIn, and the question is, did you hold any space technology or space industry stocks before the SpaceX IPO? And 65% of respondents actually responded no. Now, first of all, I appreciate the honesty there. And that goes just a question for Max to get things started. What are you observing from investors around the SpaceX IPO, and do you find anything interesting in their behavior or any interesting discussion pattern before and after the SpaceX IPO?
Yeah, no, I mean, the SpaceX IPO was fascinating. The trading volume on that week just spiked up massively. I think I got the data in front of me, which is why I have my laptop here. It was like 20 million traded on that week alone, but then the week after it was like back down to 5 million, and the week after down to 2 million. So we definitely saw like a massive spike driven in and around the IPO, but it also just drove, I think, as obviously we're having this conversation now, broader interest in the space industry in general. So I'd say in Q1 we were seeing around 2 to 3 million in like weekly trading volume in space stocks. And then in Q2, it's like in and around the IPO, it's jumped up to like 5 to 6 million. So even though there was like quite a short spike from SpaceX, it has caused a lot more people to take interest in the space theme more generally. And I think another like interesting and fascinating piece is like if we actually look at the Blossom holdings across the different space stocks, only about 20% of it is actually in SpaceX. Rocket Lab actually has more holdings. Less number of holders, but more dollars held than SpaceX itself. ASTS also very actually more held in that one as well than SpaceX. And so I think there's this, because of all of the headlines around SpaceX, people think of the space economy as being just SpaceX. But in fact, it's the other way around, is where SpaceX actually just drove a lot more eyeballs into the space.
Yeah, that definitely sounds interesting. I do think that the result of the poll also indicating the same way as what you're indicating there in your findings. So a question for Rocket Man is, what got you interested in rockets, and is there a specific thing that changed your perspective about space technology and maybe the companies that are now public?
Yes. So watching SpaceX landing rockets 10 years ago, this is really what got me into this industry. And I see a lot of development being developed from these achievements. Landing rockets, it's a lot of technologies that is needed to make this possible, and technologies we develop in this space industry not only also help achieving these achievements, but also back on Earth help with our daily life, like going to space in the 60s to the moon. We had to make a lot of new technologies to bring a massive computer in a tiny capsule. So engineers were super focused on semiconductor, how to minimize the space and everything. So this is probably one of the heritage, what like our phones, our MacBooks, all our electronic devices are super flat, circuit boards as well, thanks to these achievements and developments to make this possible.
Yeah, I can remember how fascinating it was watching the Falcon Heavy returning back in 2018, and then I think the movie First Man actually went on right after the Falcon Heavy's launch and return, which was kind of a review of where we were, where we are now, kind of thing. Now, I think it's all fun to watch. To watch rocket launches, you go Falcon 9 to Falcon Heavy, and then you watch a movie about the Apollo. But it's a different thing than to put your own money, put your own investment into that theme or into the area. I think we actually got a question here from online here, so we'll jump right into it. So I think the question is from, we have a question about cash, which is, if you had to convince a skeptical investor to care about space, what's your best argument?
Follow the management of these companies. Great companies will ensure that they don't dilute shareholders unnecessary, and they will do everything possible to generate as much income as possible by acquiring more companies, bringing more products and services to their inventory, and by being vertically integrated, they are not reliant on suppliers, which allows them to accelerate the development because they don't need to wait. There is no delay. And this also enables them to be end-to-end, provide a service from end-to-end. If we take, for example, Rocket Lab, by acquiring multiple companies, they are now able to design a satellite for their customer. Then they can launch it, then they can operate it. And we see many companies following this same process, SpaceX, Intuitive Machines, and others.
Yeah, so I think the point you made there is very good. I think it's especially for growth investors, for people that are constantly trying to follow a theme that might provide disruptive growth in their portfolio. That's definitely something good to hear. I think we also have a question kind of on the other side, relevant, but so this question is from Conscious Will 8201. The question is the space industry actually making money yet? Which I understand sounds like a lot of time value investors might ask that question more, but now that we have all these different growth themes, we have AI, we have chips, we have all these other growth themes going on at the same time. I think it's also a fair question to even within the growth theme to pull out.
There is money that is made by these companies in this industry. There is profit that is generated, but it depends. It depends on the segment. So when SpaceX IPO'd, of course, we all knew it's not profitable. It's not generating profit yet, and the reason for that is the AI segment, I think, because they spend a lot of capital building that AI infrastructure later to bring these data centers in space. But when we look at some segments like connectivity, space businesses like Iridium Communication, MDS Space, SpaceX Starlink, and others, these connectivity businesses are generally profitable because once it's in space, it's passive income for them, and there's no maintenance cost. The cost is really to build these satellites and launch them to space.
Thank you for that. And so from these space stocks and just space companies, let me turn the dial back a little bit on SpaceX specifically. And this one is for you, Max, which is now. So we got a question. It's really a sharp one from Significant Pace 7097. So now the question actually is pointing at me, but I'll wonder about your opinion first. It says, "Hi Ken, this question is for you. Is SpaceX IPO a pump and dump from Elon Musk?" Now, and if I just add a bit to that, add a bit of sauce to that question, are you seeing any pattern of trading in SpaceX post IPO on potentially investors overlapping with the holders of Tesla or maybe X that wants to capture that Elon premium, and maybe after the IPO we're seeing drawdown not just in SpaceX but also just in the tech sector in general. And for on that Elon premium and maybe this sharper question, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, there was certainly an Elon premium around it. The fact that it crossed like a $2 trillion valuation, and honestly, it crossed the valuation of even Tesla, which was wild to see. I mean, I think there was like a lot of really good commentary around it. We were talking earlier before we went live. The Plain Bagel, Richard Coffin made a great breakdown about it. I mean, I think a lot of the concern was especially around like the early index inclusion with the NASDAQ 100. So you had a lot of, basically index holders who are more or less forced to buy SpaceX due to the index inclusion, which I think is what led to a lot of this retail feeling like exit liquidity, because it didn't feel like a choice to purchase, and it felt like maybe it was getting rushed in. And so like I can see that that argument and why people are feeling that way. I think the counter argument, as you were kind of talking about, is with any of these space stories, they really need that access to capital, and so from a counter view, it makes sense that that Elon and that the company would need to IPO. And there was a lot of institutional support for the stock as well, right? Like BlackRock and a lot of these other like major institutional capital were pouring money. So it wasn't like it was completely absent of institutional capital. I mean, my personal opinion, do I think it was like overvalued, and would I like buy the stock? Like I wouldn't buy it, and I think it was overvalued. I think Morningstar like put it at around like a 700-800 million like fair value valuation, and then it ended up being like 2 trillion, right? So I think it's interesting when you look at it. There's just so much complexity with this IPO story, like especially around the index inclusion, that I think makes people feel like, oh my gosh, I was like forced to buy this stock that's like overvalued, and I'm being used as this pawn in this kind of game. So I can see where the commenter is coming from. Do I think it's a pump and dump? No, but do I think there's some interesting nuances to the story that makes people rightfully feel upset? Yes.
Yeah, that's fair, and I totally agree. And my opinion on this is actually pretty similar. Now, strictly speaking, an IPO is raising new capital. They're not meant for insider to liquidate their stocks. Exactly. It is actually issuing new shares to provide funding. Mm-hmm. And I think it's common for people to feel that way, like you said, and we have seen the performance pattern a couple of these post-IPO to be like a meme stock, like let's just
which
say.
Is wild, given it's like one of the top 10 largest.
Yeah, and then I mean, I think the important thing to notice is it's one thing to be for the stock to be overhyped and overvalued. It's something else as a pump and dump. I think it's just something that investors needs to keep in mind when getting to these type of themes. Yeah. And also, it's just from a PM's perspective, I think something important is when you're putting your money into a stock, when you're investing, especially in growth investing for themes like space technology or some other growth themes, they're called growth usually not because not necessarily because they're making a lot of money right now.
Yeah.
A lot of time it's actually, they're called growth because people assume and people have faith that they will grow quickly in the future. So their valuation currently usually has factored in all that implied growth already. So if you're investing your money into it, you can only make money if that belief grows even further, not how strong it is right now. We get it that we're all excited to go to the moon and the Mars and how much your SpaceX might be capable of doing, but those are what you're buying in at, not necessarily what you're making out. So
exactly.
So I think that also echoes to your point there about the valuation.
Yeah, it's like already like, and it's true for Tesla as well. People have always said, "Oh, Tesla's priced for perfection," and you look at things like people point to things like the Optimus, things like the robotaxi, and it's like a lot of the success of those projects is already baked into the valuation. And with SpaceX too, there's a lot of arguments to saying across their different business lines, including the basically Grok winning in enterprise AI is priced into that valuation story. So it's the additional upside beyond that is it doesn't need to just win. It needs to do almost even more than win, which is maybe like you said, classic to most growth stories. But I think with Elon, there's almost always this additional premium of like, oh, he's going to like absolutely dominate, like he kind of did with Tesla, but back in the day. So there's a reason that he has that kind of halo effect. But it definitely does result in very, very rich valuations for his company, which for early shareholders is great because to your point, it means he can raise capital without being too dilutive. But for new shareholders, it means obviously you're having to buy in at a very, very high valuation.
Thank you, Max, for that. And that's definitely a fair question as investors to ask. And we dig a bit into the technicals that people might find interesting, which is something relevant to data center. Because I think there is the one story behind it is people thinking now that we're having all these data centers on Earth. We need a lot more electricity to support, so much to do with cooling. And there's a belief that we might be able to put data centers in space. And so we got this question from Sync Brief 2793. If SpaceX really does make a data center in space, does that mean they're going to send maintenance workers to space every 6 months to fix a problem? And how much more expensive is it going to make RAM? So I'll point that question to you, Anthony. I wonder what your thoughts are about that.
Great question. No, they wouldn't send workers in space to fix the satellites because it would be too expensive. It's cheaper to rebuild that satellite and launch it again. Especially SpaceX has reusable rockets. So just like planes, they can. The only cost to go to space is the fuel. So reusability allowed SpaceX to have a cost-effective launch infrastructure, and to go to the other part of the question about data centers. SpaceX, one of their goals is to become the first entity to harness the energy of the sun by a fraction, which is, of course, technically impossible, but with SpaceX, we never know. They catch rocket mid-air and they do all sorts of projects that turn out to be working, so we'll see. But what this allows is if we have enough, if we can harness sufficient energy in space, definitely having a constellation of data centers in space will be more effective than on Earth, because on Earth, of course, we have to deal with cooling to make sure it's not overheat. Data centers don't overheat, and we don't have this problem in space because there is easy ways to regulate the temperature with thermal insulations and other technologies. And when the sun is not directly on the satellite, then it's cold in space. So yeah.
Thank you. And I just want to reiterate that nothing we've discussed should be interpreted as a financial advice. None of the discussion in this AMA should be interpreted as a financial advice. Now, another question on still relevant to that, which is so this question is from Sync Brief 2793 again. So considering SpaceX's various business, do you think it should be treated as an AI story, telecommunications, social media, or is it actually space? And how does this match with the ORBX subteams? The ORBX ETF, I think, is what it's referred to.
Yeah. It depends. I believe it depends how we look at SpaceX. So if we look at how much capital is spent, SpaceX right now spends more capital in AI than in its space infrastructure. So we could perhaps consider SpaceX as an AI business. But I think this is why SpaceX recently rebranded their XAI segment, the division, to SpaceX AI, combining both words to make it clear that it's not just a space business, it's also an AI business, both combined into space. The question about ORBX was?
No, so I think that second question is how does it match with the ORBX subthemes?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe I can take a bit to that because I think ORBX, the ORBX ETF is meant to be a pure play space tech, while SpaceX does have lots of business in other areas for various business reasons, and they're very fair. To be honest, it still is the biggest space story, given that just the SpaceX market cap itself is actually bigger than all the other space tech firms combined. So I think for ORBX's perspective, it's meant to capture pure space. But since all these themes are somewhat connected, you can't really do a clean way to remove it. And actually, a second part is that AI to that XAI.
It's going to space.
Yeah, is it actually relevant to space, or is it just SpaceX, or is it just Elon's bundling that company in for equity financing together?
That's a good question. I think this allowed. Surely this gives more value to the company because they have they are XAI has their supercomputer, and a lot of AI competitors like Google and Anthropic are paying SpaceX billions per month through 2029 to have access to SpaceX AI computers. So that's interesting, and it might be factored in this valuation, allowing SpaceX to have a bigger IPO.
Yeah. A few interesting points on there. I remember in the lead up, a lot of people were saying, oh, Elon pulled like a 180 on us because with the supercomputer, he said, obviously Grok is going to be enterprise AI, yada, yada. And then all of a sudden now he's licensing compute out to all of the competitors. And so it's like, well, it's quite a different business to say we're going to dominate and, be the next Anthropic or be the next Gemini versus, okay, we're just now licensing compute. So I think that was interesting where a lot of people thought that, obviously it generated cash flow, but it sort of weakened the story a little bit. And then I remember as well, the day of or maybe the day after the IPO, immediately they started having rumors around Tesla then getting roped into the story. And so I think it's a much harder to make the argument that Tesla is a space story as well. So I think from my perspective, it does seem more like, the halo of the SpaceX story obviously is very, very high multiple. So if Elon can get that high multiple on lower multiple areas of the business, such as selling compute, which is probably not the 100x plus multiple that the SpaceX story commands, why wouldn't he, right? Like that's what creates him this $2 trillion business, rather than it's like the sum of the parts is greater than the whatever that expression is. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I think I actually saw another question which this leads right into it. Is the overall methodology we should think about to value these space companies.
Yeah.
I mean, I get that these space tech it's a growth theme that we see a future in, but historically, for all the growth themes that exist, so say if we go back to the dot-com bubble, we actually have computers, the internet, and now that we have AI, these are kind of things that people can imagine because they're on Earth, because they're actually here where we live. Even though they don't exist, we can somewhat get where it's growing into. So the question here is, how do you value? So the question is from Fig Scary 6343. The question is, how do you value space companies today when many are still years away from consistent profitability? And I think I take that from also a second angle being some of the areas, say Elon's pitch was we should go to the Mars and we'll be going to the moon by NASA, right? So, some of these things, like what's in it that we're so fascinated about, that we're spending all these capital to develop something.
Yeah,
right?
It's a good question, because why spend billions, and mostly this money at the end is either coming from NASA or other space agencies, so from our taxes. So why, through our taxes, we would fund a space program? The reason for that is, I think, it's more than what's in space. All return, we benefit from this on Earth, as I explained, I think, earlier. So we launch connectivity satellites to benefit on Earth, having, like with Starlink, the other day I was on a plane and there was a Starlink on the plane, so I had 500 megabits seconds of speed. This was awesome. And on places on Earth where there's a disaster, like recently the earthquake, Starlink, SpaceX has provided Starlink, I think, to this location to support. So they are actively using Starlink for this purpose as well. And for other kind of satellites, we have weather satellites, agriculture satellites to monitor the agriculture. So, and even for wildfire. So there's a lot of applications to sending things to space. And now the question for Moon and Mars. When we explore, I think we push the boundaries, and it pushed us to build even more technologies to achieve that. So we don't know yet, but I'm pretty sure perhaps in a few years we will look back and see, oh, this was worth it. Going to the moon, we learned so much about making that technology more powerful under these different constraints, and yeah.
Yeah, and if I think about it, there's always been that hesitation for space programs, starting from all the way back in the days of the Apollos, right? And then now that looking back, there's so much of our technology and computer and new materials that actually evolved from the Apollo program, which when it started feels useless because you're right, because there's always the thought on, hey, why spend so much money on rockets, even though they're public, even though it sounds like private money, we're somewhat relying on government funding while they can go to, say, fund poverty programs and stuff, right? So I think it's partially to drive the demand until to build our capacity for stuff that you don't know what usage it could generate.
And I think to your point about growth stage being like later, when like in a few years, it's why it's called like growth. I think we don't know yet the technologies, and this is part of the growth that is incoming. Yeah.
And I think there's parallels with AI as well. Like it's AI feels very new because it's ChatGPT launched in like 2022, 4 years ago. People have been working on AI for 10s, 20, much longer. Like before that, and it was that kind of breakthrough moment that opened the floodgates for all of these applications. And really with the large language models, right? There was a lot of people working on AI in different applications, and then they said, oh, this applied to the large language models is where this like crazy value is.
There's
So I think,
Steve Jobs in 2027, I think, calling Siri an AI company, and
yeah, exactly, right? So it's like, I think it's interesting because space is definitely on that earlier frontier, but I think you're right, there's probably a lot of opportunity that we're not aware of yet, but which I understand, like especially if you're like a value investor or a more fundamental investor, which I probably lean like more on that side. It makes it a little bit more uncomfortable to like invest in. But I think if you're more of the moonshot investor, for lack of a better word, it can be interesting.
And so, which if I pull you both back to the question itself a little bit, then in that case, among the companies that are in the field right now, how do you value between them? How do you do pure comparisons and like pure valuations, right? So a quick example, it being your Starlink versus say Space Mobile. How do you know, how should an average investor who's not a rocket science expert know how you evaluate one against the other? Now, again, none of this is financial advice, or none of this discussion in the AMA is supposed to be financial advice.
Yeah. So I think it depends on segment. If we look at AST Space Mobile, their satellites, they need to unlock that orbital spectrum to be able to operate their satellites on this frequency. And there's demand for that, and it's complicated for companies to get these because it's highly regulated. There's a limited amount of frequencies entities can use, and it's per country. So when a company gets that spectrum, it unlocks a lot of things for them. So part of that valuation was looking ahead. If the company gets that orbital spectrum, this will allow them to start the development of their satellites, start the manufacture, launch them, and the business model would be working because they have what they need, the orbital spectrum for their business model to work. And when that step is done, the next step is how the company will generate money once they have that orbital spectrum secured. They need to have these satellites to space, and that's another. I think that this is perhaps factored in the valuation, because if the company has enough satellites, have enough resources to manufacture these satellites, launch them to space, they have enough satellites for the constellation and can operate, generate money, and as I said, the connectivity segment in space is less cost intensive than other segments, because you don't have maintenance, you don't have to build again and again and again. It's not like launch infrastructure. So when satellites are in space, then it's just getting income from these satellites. And for some for some satellite companies, when it's about connectivity, the next step is getting subscribers. So for Starlink, I think they recently reached 10 million subscribers. So this is a milestone for them, and this is perhaps factored in the valuation we see.
How do you? Because your largest holding is Rocket Lab or
Not anymore. It's Lunar.
Oh, okay. So why do you hold that one more, say, than Rocket Lab or ASTS?
Yeah, of course, not a financial advice. So Lunar, what I like about what they're doing is it's not just a lunar company anymore. For a long time, they were part of NASA's initiative to deliver as much instruments and technology demonstrations to the moon to prepare for Artemis missions. But recently, they have acquired Lenteris Space Systems. This is Rocket Lab competitor in space systems. And if we look at the space systems segment, space systems groups solar panels, reaction wheels. This is a tiny motor in these satellites, and lasers as well, and also satellite manufacturing. So this is a big segment, and it's yeah, so Lunar as intuitive machines from his name has acquired Lenteris, and this allows them to develop their inventory, not rely only on NASA's funding and contracts to launch on the moon, so have a more diversified business. And I think, of course, not a financial advice, but I tend to look at when there's some diversification in the space businesses. If one business only do lunar landings, or one only does rocket launches, if it fails, there's no revenue. There's no other streams of revenue to counter that. So I like to see companies acquiring more and more other companies. And if we look at ORBX holdings, I think there's Global Star, and Amazon will be acquiring it, which is great because they are Amazon is kind of a space stock. Perhaps we don't know, but Amazon has a constellation of satellites. So they don't just have a like online store online. They also are in the space business. They have their LEO satellites, it's called, and again, this is to compete with SpaceX, Starlink, and other players. So yeah, and I think there's also Iridium and holdings that will soon be acquired by Rocket Lab. Iridium Communication. So it's interesting to see companies acquiring more and more companies with collaborating with each other and acquiring companies, and yeah, it's interesting.
So from the sound of it, I think that my take on that is, seems like in the space area, the more you vertically integrate, for now, would be the better for the business it is. And I think we're definitely seeing that and getting into the valuation in the markets as well. And are you seeing, Max? Are you seeing that being something that investors are interested in and focused on, like say mergers and acquisitions in the area?
Yeah, I think so for sure. I mean, when Rocket Lab announced its acquisition, I think the trading volume 3x compared to like its rolling 12-month average. So it definitely drives a lot of like interest. But I think to your point, it's interesting hearing you talk about, okay, how do you evaluate these stocks? It is very different than, hey, I look at the PE, I look at this. It is more around like are they going in the right direction for the broader story, right? Like, are they vertically integrated? Are they setting themselves up like strategically?
And one super interesting thing about space stocks is most money, of course, come from space agencies, so public entities. So it's easy to predict revenue that is incoming in coming years. So when NASA has a project, we know, okay, there will be a new contract at this period of the year. So what we can expect, this company might get a part of this contract, a slice of this contract. So I feel it's easy to expect what's coming in this industry. And this helps like factor the valuation, and it explains a bit why some stock might have a higher valuation, because NASA might announce, or the Canadian Space Agency might announce a contract.
That's an interesting one. And I also got another interesting question here, which is relevant to your method of valuation, actually, which is, so the question is from Grapefruit number 5885. So the question is, how long until low Earth orbit satellites are saturated with the satellites, and then space debris become a concern to the number of future launches? Which I think is something that you mentioned at the very beginning. Can we actually physically be constrained for LEO orbits?
So recently, SpaceX has announced a global cooperation with other space companies, agencies, to work with each other to make sure there's no collisions in space. But there's a lot of space in space. So of course, when we look at videos, when we see a lot of satellites close to each other, like if we compare the 60s with today, we think there's a lot of, like, we feel it's saturated. It's not saturated yet because we lose the depth perspective when we see these videos. So satellites, especially CubeSat, this is a satellite that is like a cube, 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters. These are really like small satellites. So even if there are like hundreds and thousands of them, there will be a lot of space to bring more satellites. But the next question, I think, related to that is are we polluting space? This is a real concern. And now, most space companies are working really closely with, again, well, as I said, with each other to make sure there's no collision, so there's no debris in space, and also to make sure when the satellite reaches their end of life, operating life, the satellites deorbit itself and burn in the atmosphere, and it consumes in the atmosphere, so there is to not pollute the orbit. Yeah.
Yeah, because I definitely think it's a very it's a comment that I hear a lot from online in general. So I think that's a very question to pull out on, and also for growth investors and this, we can also be a bit scared by the fact that if we can actually be constrained physically, then there is a ceiling to the growth on just satellite growth itself, right? So it's good to hear that we have that firms and regulators have something working to address that. And so now, so we at GlobalX we launched the ORBX ETF for investors to have easy access into the space theme as a thematic ETF, and obviously, SpaceX just went IPO recently. Are there any space companies you find interesting that are still private? This is a question from Significant Pays 7097.
Yeah. One private company I like is Astranis in the US. So it's a private company that is launching connectivity satellites, and one I find cool about them is to like have other streams of income while they build these satellites. They have in their shop they sell on their satellite panel and metal segment. They sell like we can like buy to write our name on these panels. So it's interesting. It's an interesting way for them to raise capital without looking at private firms and going public, because not all space companies want to go public when they begin, of course, and this is a way for them to raise capital. To have another source of income to build these satellites and cover a bit the cost. So it's interesting to see. So each satellite they launch to space has about 200 names on it for $50 each, and they do that for each launch. So and then they send a picture by mail with your name. So we are certain that our name is in it. I can confirm because I received an email the other time when I tried it, and I have my name in space now.
that makes you Rocket Man even more real, actually.
And you're saying Blue Origin as well, right? Is another one that you're...
Astranis was the one I meant. Oh, Blue Origin.
For private? So Blue Origin is still private, but there are some talks there and there about will they go public? We'll see, but Blue Origin recently raised capital at a 150 billion valuation. So compared to SpaceX right now, it's much lower. And of course, Blue Origin does not have this AI segment that SpaceX has. And if we compare with Rocket Lab, which is one of Blue Origin's competitor, Rocket Lab has half the valuation of Blue Origin. So interesting to see, and I'm looking forward to if they will IPO to see where things will go in the future.
Yeah.
Do you think I mean, it seems like a lot of the companies are public, so I guess that's a challenge with any ETF is making sure, like with AI space, you have ones like Anthropic and all these that are still private, so it's like, it's difficult to get that exposure. But do you find that the ETF is able to give pretty broad-based exposure to the space economy?
I think it does. Now, first of all, this is again, this is not for financial advice, but I think for a thematic ETF, at GlobalX, our thematic ETFs try to focus on the pure play themes. Right. It can, first of all, I think it depends on how the ETF is constructed. The more pure play it is, I think, the more it captures the beta of that theme itself. Yeah. I think especially for a very common misconception, I think, is that thematic ETFs are just a random bucket of stocks that we bucket together and then stamp a name on it and call it a day, and then we go out and advertise. I think an important part here is you really try to capture the firms that are in the area, that are in the field. And a lot of times, these area, field themes are not strictly defined by classic sectors. Yeah. So in space tech, for example, in our ORBX ETF, for example, we have a heavy exposure in communication services, which because companies like SpaceX and because of their Starlink, and for companies like Space Mobile, they're actually categorized as communication services. Right. But when you think about it, it's not like you're buying the stock of Rogers and Bell. It's a totally different thing, right? So in traditional investing, you either classify your investments into sectors or you classify them into investment styles for like factors. You're a value or growth investor, or you're a momentum investor. But sometimes for deep growth investors specifically that are trying to capture something that's disruptive, a lot of times these your sectors and factors don't necessarily capture the theme good enough, not fast enough. Anyways, over time, maybe your AI stocks and chip stocks become growth stocks, but when it just started evolving, a lot of times that beta is just missing. Yeah. And ETFs, I think there's two things it can serve. You can serve the first thing as a public proxy to the companies you like that are not necessarily public yet. Yeah. And a second thing being you use thematic ETF to avoid selecting companies wrong, to avoid that single stock selection error if you just like the theme in general. Now, it's a different story if you just happen to be a Elon fan. Like if you like Elon specifically, and then that's the reason you hold SpaceX, then good for you. That you have a very fair reason to do that, right? But that's to say, depending on an investor's own risk profile and the preferences, you can a thematic ETF in space. In this case, we have ORBX, right? Will be a good option for people to. As a thematic holding in the portfolio. Yeah.
Can I ask one follow-up question? How do you guys select the weightings of the different holdings?
Yeah. So that's actually another pros for using an ETF, because part of the weighting we actually do risk management for you, because we have a cap of each holding being lower than 20%. So even SpaceX at this point. It's only about 20%. Yeah. Otherwise, as soon as SpaceX gets included, then if we weight it by market cap, then you go 99%, and the rest are close to zero, right? Which wouldn't make sense if you're actually going in the space field. Because one other thing for just retail investors is even though SpaceX is being so dominant right now in the area, no company can avoid the Nokia moment for the Nokia moment, BlackBerry. I mean, here in Canada, we all feel that as we as the switch from people using BlackBerry to iPhone, right? No great company can actually say, "Hey, I can go avoid that," right? And then for individual investors, it's kind of a pain if you have to track that every day. So first of all, position sizing wise, we have a cap of 20%, but that also means for there's generally around 3 tiers of weightings in our index, in our ETF. We go at 20%, then 20%, 10%, and 5%.
Okay.
And you kind of go by the market weight. But that's kind of a way how we bucket them. So it's not strictly from linearly from biggest to smallest. So that in the allocation here, it feels like you're still giving these smaller companies a chance, and it's kind of important for a growth field because as per my previous comment on your bigger companies at this point are implied valuation, not necessarily in a traditional sense of they are bigger or having more assets.
Yeah.
But to your question, that is how we construct. And also your revenue has to be more than half generated. You have to have more than 50% in space to be actually qualified to enter the index consideration. So you can't be like your CEO talk about space. Hey, well, it's like these days all companies talk about AI, right? You can't just throw in space in your report and then get included in the index somehow. You actually have to have your revenue and earnings in that area.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Very cool.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. Which becomes a default mode if you're just interested. If you are interested in space, maybe it's because of SpaceX IPO. But anyways, that theme caught your eyes. But it's too much of a pain or too technical for you to look into all the details on say rockets, satellite details. So yeah, I think that's where and that question also came up in our AMA. There is a question about cash of why would I buy a space ETF now that I can just buy SpaceX, and I'll actually after mentioning all of that, actually devote that to a view on what your thoughts on that is, because I know there are lots of thoughts, and some of that's not necessarily just about space. Some of that's actually on thematic ETF versus that hot stock in that area in general, right?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when buying a particular space company, you are like each space company is super specialized into something. SpaceX it's rocket and satellites. For some other companies, it's only like communication services like ASTS. Of course, none of this is financial advice. And I think being in an ETF like ORBX, you have all these different segments that you can have exposure to. Unlike if you only invest in a particular space company like SpaceX. But yes, again, not financial advice, and yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think to both your points, it's just completely different, right? Like if ORBX is like less than 20% SpaceX, 80% of the holdings are non-SpaceX tickers, some of which, as I was looking at before, I wasn't even familiar with, right? So I think you're getting exposure to different parts of the industry that, unless you have the time to research every single company in the space, pun not intended, then I think a thematic ETF can be a great way to go, right? So I mean, for me personally, for someone like you definitely have the time and the interest to probably like pick and choose and say, I like this one better than this one. For me, I'm better off going with either an ETF or following Anthony.
It's great to mention this because I think it can be a bit boring exploring a field you don't know necessarily. Like, okay, it's a space company, but is it just launching rockets? Well, space is more than rockets. It's satellites. It's building the satellites. It's even like there are some space companies focused like on solar panels that goes into these satellites, and some companies are super specialized and expert at something. So they are super different. And ORBX, as we mentioned, I think 80% are other companies than SpaceX. So there's exposure to all the kinds of segments in the industry.
And I think last but not the least, I think you don't. Again, this is not financial advice. Depends on your personal situation. But as a feature of an ETF, not just a thematic ETF, a lot of ETFs you can actually buy them in margin accounts. So you don't have to feel obligated to buy a single stock to enhance your own return. It's actually two totally different things. Totally depend on your preference. It should be what fits your portfolio than which one you feel like drives more volatility. And that concludes our AMA today. Thanks for joining us, guys. If you find this helpful, smash that like button. Remember to subscribe